Sorry to put our like population so That's right. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Very nice.
The longer you're here, the more you got people that hate you.
Yes, awesome. I'd like to call the Finance, Ways and Means Appropriations Subcommittee to order on February 14th, Valentine's Day, 2022. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Representatives Campbell, Faison, Garrett, Hazelwood, Hicks of Hawkins, Lamar, Miller, Sexton of Granger, Shaw, Sparks, Zachary, Chairman Williams. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, members. Just for your information, today's discussion is going to be on sales tax reductions. Many of us have the opportunity to listen to funding board meetings and find out how the governor's staff, F&A, revenue determine what we're going to do as far as taxation is concerned. As many of the members know, the amount of taxes that we're collecting is at an all-time high, which is fantastic. That means we're doing a lot of things right. The purpose of the discussion today is to really look at back in 2002, the Tennessee General Assembly was under some constraints as it relates to budgets. We increased our local sales or our state sales tax from 6% to 7% because of the demand that we needed for revenue. Now that's been 20 years later. The idea is if we look back as to what the future may hold, I know we have issues as far as pressure from inflation, cost of living raises and things like that, and the possibility of raising interest rates in the summer. And so I've asked the Department of Revenue and F&A to come and tell us a little bit about what this process would look like. This is very awkward for them. I spoke with them previously. Everybody likes to retain revenue whenever you can, but I appreciate them being here today. Gentlemen, if you will, we're going to go out of session. And if you will come have with me today, F&A Commissioner Butch Ely, Revenue Commissioner David Geragano. If you will, please introduce yourselves. The members will know that the white paper distributed to your office is on the dashboard, as well as a presentation that you're seeing before us. Gentlemen, thank you for coming this long budget full Monday afternoon. So,
Hey,
thank you.
thank you, Chairman Williams. Appreciate you having us today, and members of the committee. Thank you. Always a pleasure to speak before you. As you said, Commissioner Geragano is here and is more expert than I am in this question. But I wanted to at least set a little bit of the table in some of the discussions that we had and the funding board, as you mentioned, Chairman. And so I would say that first in comment to one of your questions about holding on to taxes or not, really philosophically, we certainly do not necessarily feel like that's what we should do based on it's taxpayers' money, and we need to utilize those dollars as efficiently and effectively as possible. So I think that what we heard, though, during the funding board process back in the fall, we heard from the economists, from the Federal Reserve, from your fiscal review, and every single person expressed caution as being our watchword as we entered into this 23 budget process. Every single entity that testified before the funding board indicated that they felt like that our growth would be down or less in growth in fiscal year 23 than it was this current year in 22. And so certainly as we entered this budget process, caution has been and was a watchword as we approached it. And I would say certainly today that as we look at the largest single revenue stream that we have here in the state of Tennessee, if you take out gas, our highway funds, fully 70%, over 70% of our revenue stream coming from sales tax, that a reduction at this time is something that I certainly would not recommend, and that as we looked at it with our state economists, that we felt like that now was not the time, that we needed a year kind of level set of a good stable environment where we all knew kind of where we stood before embarking on either spending too much of the recurring dollars that we have this year. As you know, the budget that we've got before you holds back $1.3 billion of recurring funds, so those funds will be available as we go into the next fiscal year cycle in 24. So we're not even spending all the funding that could be available this year in fiscal 23. And I certainly similarly don't feel like that cutting that revenue stream would be the prudent thing to do in a year of uncertainty. So I think you did summarize the general feeling overall, Chairman. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Geragano and let him present the data that you asked for.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, for the record, David Geragano, Commissioner of Revenue. I'll try to be, fairly succinct. Have about 7 or 8 slides. I'm going to kind of a little bit of the big picture, a little bit of the nuts and bolts, and some figures that the committee specifically asked for. First of all, as Commissioner Ely has already alluded to, this is a fairly familiar slide that many have seen. Just a pie chart with the general structure of our state tax revenue allocation. With, I think of it as currently the sort of the 80-10-10 rule in my mind, meaning 80% of our revenue comes from sales tax and corporate franchise and excise tax, with 10% being road funds, and then a remaining sort of 10% other. And as Commissioner Ely mentioned, I think appropriately so, if you really set the road funds aside as being something different, then that sales tax percentage really is 70%, and sales and F&E combined is really 90% of the funds that fund general state operations. And as I've said many times, a lot of states have at least 3 major sources of revenue. We really have 2, which is fine. It just means that we need to be sort of cautious with the long-term stability of those 2 taxes in particular. That's why we spend a lot of time talking about sales tax and F&E. Sort of some of the basic structure of the sales tax. As you know, we have a state rate of 7% generally. That's on items of tangible personal property, a limited number of services, things like repair of tangible personal property, amusements, telecommunications, that sort of thing. The rate on food and food ingredients is 4%, as you know. Sometimes there's some detail in what is meant by food with the lower rate. Generally, that can be thought of mostly as grocery food, things you buy at the grocery to prepare yourself. There are some specific exclusions, being alcoholic beverages, tobacco, candy, dietary supplements, and prepared food. And prepared food would obviously include restaurant food and that sort of thing. There is, of course, all that is the state rate. There is, in addition, a local option rate that varies up to 2 3/4%. Department of Revenue collects that on behalf of local governments and distributes that back to them. Continuing sort of the overview, where does the money go? And the 7% state tax rate, sort of distributed as you see in the slide. 1% is earmarked to the general fund. That was from the 2002 increase, I believe, Mr. Chairman, you alluded to. 0.5 cent is exclusively to the education fund, and the remaining 5.5% is distributed via a formula in the statute. What does that really equate to the 7% rate when all is said and done goes 38% to the general fund, 58% to K through 12 education, and 3.6% to the cities. Getting to some of the recent collections, I think you can see in this slide the sort of the 80-10-10 distribution again. What I would really I think what's likely on many people's minds is that 15% year-over-year growth in sales and use tax when you compare FY21 to FY20. That number certainly does stand out. Obviously, if you look at the column to the far right, the total sort of point contribution, you can see that sales tax growth drove the 14% overall growth for that year. But there's some things I would really point out and urge folks to take note of with respect to that number. I can identify at least 3 things that I would look at as sort of one-time events that are helping drive that number. The first being just the disruption from COVID. When we look at a year-over-year growth rate, we're obviously comparing FY21 to FY20, and we all know what happened in March, April, May of FY20. So we're really comparing 21 to it's an artificially inflated growth rate, if you will, because it's measured against that disrupted period when we had all the closure and all the lack of activity. So that's a significant factor that really doesn't provide an accurate sort of picture if you just look at that percentage growth rate number. In addition to that, and also quite significant, is the new marketplace facilitator law. I think a lot of people are familiar with. It's sort of the end result of the Wayfair decision regarding out-of-state businesses collecting our sales tax for us. And in October of 20 is when the marketplace facilitator part of that went into effect. So in FY21, we really had 3 full quarters in which these marketplace facilitators were collecting tax for the first time. And so we're comparing those very substantial collections in FY21 to FY20 when that did not exist at all. So that's really they're going to continue to collect, but that growth comparing year over year is a one-time event. And it's a very significant amount of money. Third, we all are aware of the inflation. And we did some looking during the second half of FY21. The inflation rate was 86% higher than the same period in FY20. It actually continued to go on up from there. But if you just, again, comparing 21 to 20, the inflation rate was significantly higher and also drove that number. Mr. Chairman, this next slide contains, I think, some of the specific numbers that you and the committee asked for, and there's quite a few numbers on this page. I'm not going to try to go through them all. It's really intended sort of as a takeaway for you. The request was for what the impact would be in FY19, 20, 21 if the rates had been lower. So the quick way to look at that is in the 2 bullets at the bottom. A 1% reduction in the standard 7% rate during FY21 would have been a $1.5 billion reduction in revenue. And that's about 8.5% of the entire amount that the Department of Revenue collected. If, again, you did that exercise of taking the road funds out of it, that amount really is really closer to 10% of general governmental revenue collections is what that represents. A 1 point reduction in the 4% food rate would be about $145 million. And of course, folks can easily take from that what a half percent reduction would be, et cetera. And finally, Mr. Chairman, this is a map of the state and local tax collections per capita across the country. And you can see that Tennessee is 50th. We are have the lowest per capita state and local collections in the country. And I think something that was interesting to me, if you spend a little time looking at the map, the next lowest state, the next state with next lowest state and local collections per capita is Alabama. When you start looking at it, Alabama is 7% higher than Tennessee. And if you look at so we're 50th, Alabama's 49th. If you look at South Carolina, which is 48th, their per capita tax is 13% higher than Tennessee. So it's not just that we are the lowest. There is actually a gap. And if you look at our highest bordering state would be Virginia, and their per capita state and local tax is 52% higher than Tennessee. And notably, that only puts them at about the median of all states. So I think some interesting detail when you sort of study that map a little bit. And, in addition to that, we know that from a long history that state revenue growth, based on our structure, revenue growth in Tennessee does not keep pace with the growth in the economy over time. If you just compare today to the mid-2000s, state and local revenue as a percentage of personal income has declined by more than 17%, and that it will continue. Even if nothing changes, that will continue to decline over time. So I think the takeaway is that we, as Commissioner Ely alluded to, we would urge caution from our perspective as the revenue collecting agency. We would urge caution about reducing our largest source of revenue during what's clearly unusual circumstance, letting that play out further, and particularly when the long-term trend is downward, even without any change in the rates. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I would pause and be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Giorgano. I do have a question, and then I've got some other people with questions. Do you know, of course, I don't think any of us, maybe Representative Miller was here in 2002. I don't know if he was or not, but the based upon that, your Commissioner Ely's been doing a fantastic job for 2 years now, I guess. The administration's in their 4th year of budgets. I guess the question is, has there been any discussion since 2002 about should we cut? I know Mr. Thurman is here as well. Do you remember any of those discussions? Have we ever considered in the past about a reduction other than the food tax? I think was 1% from 5 to 4 in 2017. Is that how do those discussions take place from your side?
Yeah, I would certainly defer to Mr. Thurman or Commissioner Ely, or and I haven't. So I've been around the department since 2002, but not in this level of position.
Yeah.
In my experience, the discussion generally has gravitated toward the food tax, and I think that's objectively demonstrated in the fact that it's actually been reduced in 2007, 12, 13, and 17 to get from sort of the 6%. As you're alluding to, in 2002, the rate was increased from 6 to 7. But food was left at 6, and then it's been decreased 4 other times to get to the current 4% rate.
Thank you. Chairman Zachary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, commissioners. I feel like we've seen you guys a few times over the last couple of weeks. Mine is more just a philosophical question. So Tennessee is thriving because we keep taxes low, we keep regulation low, we keep spending under control. I'm 4 terms in, and every year I've been here, we have had some level of surplus. Now, obviously, over the last couple of years, it has grown significantly. But we're coming out of a worldwide pandemic that basically shut the economy down. Our state is one of 7 states that grew economically. We are one of the 5 most visited states during a pandemic, only non-beach state. If you look at tax cuts, Coolidge in 24, JFK in 64, Reagan, and even Trump to a certain extent, every time we cut taxes, it leads to additional economic growth because it leads to additional spending. It increases revenue because we're cutting taxes. We're putting more money back in the economy of our state, empowering our citizens to invest and take steps with their own capital. So when do we reach a point? And again, and just know this is not a criticism. This is more just me trying to process and walk through this. And I mean this, and I mean this with all sincerity. I went back preparing for this. I went back and listened to some audio from Milton Freeman. I actually went back and looked at a book that Calvin Coolidge wrote about his times for cutting tax cuts, and whether it was in 24 or 82 or under President Trump, the conversation was from the economists, well, now's not a good time to cut spending. Now's not a good time to cut taxes because of the uncertainty or whatever may be pending. So when will we reach a point where, hey, it is now appropriate to be able to cut taxes? As a conservative, I feel like we are in the position now where, again, we're coming out of a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic, where we didn't have to touch our rainy day fund. So when does it reach a point where we say, you know what, now is the time. Now is the time. General Assembly, let's take some steps to put those resources back in the pockets of the people of our state. And charts, all these things are predictors, I can understand, and these are done by people much smarter than me. But when do we take the step of now is the time to infuse people's money back into their pockets for additional investment and growth, especially coming up to a time of economic uncertainty?
Thank you for that question, or maybe not. But I think that
It was more of a political rant, but yes,
well,
sir. Yeah, thank you.
you raise a good question, and I certainly I'll take a shot at the kind of the philosophical part, and Commissioner can chime in as we get into this discussion. But I would say that certainly you won't find any administration that is ever more aware of the impact of governmental spending and the impact of taxes on business and small businesses, particularly as this administration. And so certainly we believe in making sure that every dollar that this state gets is spent wisely, and that we have as small a government as necessary or as possible to be able to serve our people of the state. So having said that, my answer would be that when we have an environment that is more stable and predictable, I mean, with predictability comes that stability that allows us to be able to know with more certainty what our levels of revenue are going to be in coming years, to be able to do the things that this body has voted on and passed with the services that you provide this state every year. If you think about this budget that we proposed this year, there is no new debt. We are paying off debt, actually, that we had authorized previously. We are investing in reducing our pension liabilities so that in the out years we're able to be able to make sure that those are paid down more quickly. And so we've got 11% of this budget this year that is devoted to those kinds of things that are in many ways things that certainly are going to be reducing taxpayer increases or taxpayer spending, increases in years to come. And so being able to pay down those kinds of liabilities and those kind of things now with those funds, I think is a tremendous hedge on increasing of any taxes in the future, and allows us to be able to do the things that we need to do. When I think about this year's budget, we have after the spending that being proposed over on the non-recurring side, approximately $2.3 billion. And as you have seen proposed, a billion of that going to new education spending. So another little over $1 billion in proposed spending in this current budget. With that, you've seen a lot of things in this budget that we've not been able to do that I think most would agree that are needed in 100 new troopers that this budget does. We've got about 45 new TBI employees put to this, both in new TBI agents as well as also lab scientists and technicians. The TEIS increased from 3 years to 4 years. I don't want to have to bore you going through all of those things, but most of those are things that we've been trying to get to for the last number of years, that we feel comfortable this year that we've got the cushion or the comfort to be able to do those services for the people of Tennessee without increasing any taxes and without putting ourselves in a situation where we would have to increase one year and then take it back the next year. And so we've got those things this year. If you look at kind of I'll call it the worst case scenario, but the scenario that that Commissioner outlined, if we took $1.5 billion out of what we're spending for next year, then we wouldn't be doing any of those things. And so I would ask us what of those enhancements would we not want to do? Certainly with the one-time spending that we're doing, we've got several $1 billion of deferred maintenance of things that we have not done over the years. And that's not saving us money. Being able to use those dollars now to invest in our infrastructure, to invest in our current assets, is actually saving us money in the out years. And so I think where we are now is being able to spend those dollars that we have over and above our current spending is wise and prudent. And if it continues at the rate we're going, then I certainly do think at some point in the not that distant future that we'd be looking at being able to do more cutting of taxes.
Mr. Garrett, did you have anything to comment there?
Mr. Chairman, I can't add a lot to that.
Okay.
And then I would just say, from a structural standpoint, we have had sort of an unprecedented long period of good collections, but that will not last, forever. And the sales tax, and particularly the sales tax on food, lends stability. The other big component is F&E, which is notoriously volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you look at the structure itself in the long-term picture, I think it's sort of about stability over the long term.
Right. Chairman Zachary, you got a follow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just the last comment, and commissioners, thank you for those comments. My only comment to you related to stability is based on the dysfunction and inability of Congress to accomplish anything on both sides of the aisle, and how Congress, again, on both sides of the aisle, has failed the American people, putting our country in an you're talking about unsustainable, in an unsustainable position in terms of their unwillingness to cut spending. I believe I'd have to go back and look. I think it was October or November of last year. We had record revenue come into the Treasury. We have a spending problem. We do not have a revenue problem. And so I would say in terms of our assessing any level of stability, if we continue down the road, we have interest rates increase in March or a couple more times this year with what Congress is doing, there will never be an environment from California to the East Coast that will provide a level of stability that will provide us with a comfort to move forward with a tax cut. But then I would also say too, if the people that I represent choose to send me back, and if the speaker sees fit to put me on this committee next year, and we come back next year and we still continue to see revenue producing at the level we are now, I think that would be the time to warrant serious conversations about what some sort of tax cut and putting those dollars back in the hands of Tennesseans looks like. And I do want to say just quickly, Mr. Chairman, I mean, you guys do a phenomenal job. I mean, Tennessee is one of the best run states in the nation. So I do not want to hear anybody think from my comments means this is a criticism by far. No, far from it. Your predecessors before you have put us in this position that Tennesseans are thriving. Tennesseans are winning. And it's because of leadership like you two gentlemen. And so thank you for what you do. And I don't know if I'm supposed to call you deputy governor or commissioner, whatever title you prefer, but with all sincerity, thank you for what you do, and appreciate how you steward our state's resources.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Zachary. Representative Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question focuses primarily on inflation. And with the inflation today, some call it a crisis. How does that affect a potential reduction in sales tax? Thank you.
You want to start?
Thank you, Representative Campbell, for the question. I mean, I think, trying to think in terms of your question, how does it affect it? I mean, I think as a starting point, obviously, sales tax is based on the price of the item, and that's why I referenced inflation as part of what's driving that FY21 growth number, because as prices go up, then collections do go up. The flip side can be over time, consumption can go down. So it's sort of a net, how much does the price and the consumption level balance out? And so we've seen some inflation. I'm not an economist, don't claim to be an economist, don't know how long that will last. But hopefully it will level out. But you sort of from a collector's point of view, it's sort of how does it impact overall gross sales of a company? And so the price is going to be an upward pressure on gross proceeds that are taxable, but consumption can be a downward pressure, and it sort of depends on where the balance lands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Garrett. Leader Garrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy Governor, Commissioner, I'll just call you all of them.
Leader.
How about, will that work? We have, as you know, and probably can tell, we've got a large amount of population growth here in the state of Tennessee. Of course, sales tax is driven by people either living here, coming here, traveling through here, whatnot. So obviously, our population is going to affect our sales tax. And so my questions kind of centers around that. Is with a projected 200,000 people moving to the middle Tennessee area, will this extra revenue create an avenue in which, as we've a lot of discussed here, it could be possible to reduce the sales tax burden on our population?
Well, again, I don't want to talk like an economist, because I'm not one either, as Commissioner pointed out. But I think that it's incumbent upon us to be able to have the taxes available to provide the services that this body and the governor has recommended to be able to provide for the citizens of our state, and really not more than that. I mean, there's no need, once we have the rainy day funds and the ability to fund the services that this legislature has passed, then we shouldn't continue to tax beyond that. And so certainly at that point, then we should consider continuing to look at not continuing to have taxes beyond what is needed. So I would not disagree with that. I think that what we've tried to do with this budget that is before you is to guard against the instabilities that we are seeing now with inflation, because that inflation could have the impact of people certainly not purchasing the way that they had been purchasing that we've seen in the last 2 years. We also know from real data that are collected from the Department of Revenue that many of those expenditures have been for durable goods, one-time purchases like automobiles and boats and cars that aren't going to continue on a day-to-day basis. And so we have restrained this budget to where we're only spending 62% of the recurring funds that are available in ensuring that we have that stability going forward into next year in case of a downturn. And it's been pointed out by Commissioner, it hadn't happened since I've been here, but we have seen years where our revenue estimates have been drastically below what ended up being the actuals for that year. And in those years, and some of you have seen that, where pretty severe reductions had to be made in a year or 2 years time frame, and it took several years to kind of dig out of that. And that's what I'm trying to avoid with this, is to look at it in a multi-year basis, not just 1 year to say, oh, we've got more money, let's either spend it all or let's reduce it or give it back. Let's have a couple of years of stability before we look at those options. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, I think some of us were here. I think it was 13, maybe it was 13, where we were, I remember a $231 million number short. It was not a fun time. That was the first time I'd ever been here. And I think it was the volatility of F&E tax that got us that year. And nothing like printing one of these big books, sending it around the state, and then not being able to do it. It's painful. But anyways, Chairman Hicks, you have a question?
The question I had, actually, Chairman, has pretty much been asked, so I won't belabor the point. It's good to see you all here. And I guess the only thing that I would say, and then I'll be quiet, is the fact that with all the federal money, it's just really made a interesting situation much more interesting, because eventually the federal money is going to go away from not only individual purses, but it's also going to go away from them directly to government. So that's going to be an interesting, probably 3-year, 4-year phase out, especially with education. They can spend theirs up to 2024. And I saw another number, 2026, for the federal monies will be completely out. So, I saw my predecessor, that was the chairman of Budget Sub, walk out a few minutes ago. And if you'd have asked him 10 years ago if, would he ever see this happen, I think he'd tell you real quick, there's no way. And of course, you kind of already alluded to that as well. So I think, and when I gave a talk to Chamber of Commerce on Saturday, and I think the word of the day is caution. With whatever we're doing when it comes to budget, whether it's revenue or budgeting, I mean, it's certainly caution. And it seems really strange to say that with all this excess revenue, but we don't know what it's going to look like when everything is gone in 2 years and everything settles down. So that's pretty much what everybody said, but I guess I just wanted to say it a different way. So, but thank you all again for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair Lady Hazelwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll just call you the man for all seasons, or the Renaissance man, or whatever, since you have all those titles. Not to rain on anybody's parade, but to second my colleague here to my right, I think caution is the word for the day, and I appreciate the cautionary approach that you and the administration have taken because of all the factors just mentioned. And in that regard, Commissioner, we had a conversation. I can't remember if it was in a committee or exactly where, but we had great numbers revenue numbers in November. We got December numbers in. Could you speak to what those numbers look like, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Hazelwood. So we have seen really unprecedented growth, as has already been stated here. When we came to funding board meeting in November, really, as I mentioned, all the economists said that they felt like 22 would be the year that we would start seeing less of that growth than we had been seeing. In fact, our revenue numbers, and you can speak to this also, Commissioner, but this past week, we announced those numbers, and it was about 8.9. Is that
Yeah, maybe.
right? Right.
close.
A little over 8%, not quite 9%, year over year. And we had we had been running around 20% for the months prior up to, and this is collections from last month in January, which means that was December activity. And so we had a bigger growth month in November than we did in December. And as you recall, there was a lot of publicity around the holidays about going ahead and making purchases and things ahead of time. And so October, November were very strong, and it ended up being more so than December, even though December is traditional month with Christmas purchases. So I just see that as the first month that we have seen that downtick. It is the exact thing that the economists, when we came before them, or they came before us in November, the funding board told us would be happening. And so I think it is exactly what we expected to see and what we need to be cautious about, as you said.
I think that underscores the need for the cautionary approach that's being taken. And, we are a sales tax dependent state. These charts show that, and a lot of factors drive that. When you were just commissioner, last year's budget, I remember part of the presentation talking about, and I believe it's in this year's budget presentation as well, but the makeup of the sales tax based on, normally it's service and how those things have changed. And durable goods is a huge number. And there comes a point that people they have all the durable goods that they need. Those are not things that you replace on an annual basis. So I think there are just a lot of things when you really dig down into the numbers that say, whoa, and we're trying to give back to Tennesseans in ways that make sense by doing a lot of prevention, things that will cost future taxpayers less. So again, I appreciate the approach that's being taken. And while we just kind of wait and see how this economy is going to shake out and whether we get another infusion of federal dollars from an infrastructure grant that would again, blow up the numbers. There's just so many uncertainties out there that I do very much appreciate the fact that we're moving slowly and carefully. So thank you.
Thank
Chair.
you. Caution is the word. I think everyone understands that. I think just as a clarification, though, no federal dollars are recognized in this budget. It's just the growth. The federal dollars are handled through the UCG. Is that a correct statement or not?
No, I mean,
There's
our-
capital projects that we've transferred in to be spent, but operationally, there's no federal dollars there, correct?
There are dollars in the $52 million budget that does include the federal dollars that we know are coming into this budget. But when we talk about the general fund dollars that are state dollars, then that's separate from the dollars coming in from the feds,
Okay.
as I think you're mentioning.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Governor. Representative Shaw, you're on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much. Thank you, Commissioner. I just wanted to make this quick comment. I've had a chance, and certainly not as long as Representative Miller and maybe some others in the room, but I've had a chance to sit on this committee from the time I come here in 2000. Actually, this is the only committee that I was never taken off of. And I've also had a chance to serve with several different leaders. And I want to say kudos to everybody, because what I think we've done and what I've seen over the years is us balancing services in Tennessee. Sometimes just, and everybody likes a tax cut. We all love that. That's just something we love. But I've seen us do things where we could give a lot of relief to our citizens more than just in tax cuts, because as you know, and everybody know right now, we're giving sales tax holidays, things that we used not do. And I guess we could probably give more of those if necessary. But I would also say for us, when has it been when we could say a year out, we know that our budget is going to be balanced? We can say that this year because we got money for next year. But how many states can say that we really don't have to worry for the next couple of years because we okay? So I think that means there's really good management going on in terms of what we're getting. But I could also say that not many people can say anymore, I can't find a job. Jobs available. We're providing so much for our citizens, our constituents, and now that I don't know if they can complain about anything, because this state is one of the better states that anybody could live in and to serve in. And so I just want to say kudos to what you all are doing, because I think you're doing it right. And it's hard to guess. It's hard to say we're going to cut sales tax. And I believe somebody said 2 years down the road, you got to go back and add it back. Maybe we ought to look at ways how we can give some perks, but stay standard. And that's what I've seen over the last years at state doing here, staying at a standard, staying on a solid ground and doing things in a standard way so we don't have to take it back, come back in next year and say, what we give you, we got to take it back. I just want to make that comment to say that I think we've always had, and we have good management in the state of Tennessee. And having said that, I'm not against a tax cut. I'd love to have one too. But I think we ought to look at other ways we could give perks and stay standard, if that makes good sense. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Representative Shaw. Let me take this opportunity to say to this body that this is being in the situation that we're in, where we are, as Commissioner Jerry Gano has pointed out and shown, this map up here is pretty telling, being the lowest tax state in the country, at a time when many are having to go into debt, many states, in order just to make ends meet. And that is something that certainly I didn't do overnight. It is a culmination of the very strong fiscal foundation that this body and in our legislature and our governors in the past have provided for this state to put us in the condition that we're in. And so kudos to you and this body too for the leadership that they've taken over the years to put us in the position that we're in today.
Thank you. Finally, Representative Miller, you're on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, thank you all.
Yes, sir.
I think I'm the only somebody in this committee right now that, looking at the two questions or the number of questions, but one is the 1% reduction to standard 7% would be 1.5 billion. And I must be very cautious. But then a 1% reduction of the 4% rate on food would be 145 million. When you talk about the number of dollars, the surpluses that we have, unprecedented growth rate, and we talk about the number of dollars in our budget, 52 billion. Explain to me the number of billions that have come through the CARES Act, and if any of those dollars are being invested and used creatively to cushion us for exactly what we're talking about now.
Thank you, Representative Miller. I would respond that they are definitely being used to do exactly what you're stating. I think that if you think about our typical federal funding that has come into the state the last few years has been around 14 billion a year. Last year was 22 billion in 2022. This year we're estimating now at 19, almost 20 billion. So it's settling right there in that $20 billion range. So those funds have no doubt, as Chairman Hicks pointed out, I mean, we've had over $6 billion coming into the state in the last year or so that have gone to individually to many Tennesseans. They've gone to many businesses through the different programs that were part of the federal stimulus spending. All of those things helped add to the dollars that I think people were able to spend in the last year or two that have contributed to the situation that we're in today. What that has allowed us to do as a state is do some of the things that this budget does, and that is to invest in our assets in Tennessee. So when you look at, I mentioned deferred maintenance, many of our buildings in our state parks, our corrections, other buildings that each of you know from your travels in your districts and around the state, a lot of them have not been in the greatest condition. We put more investment in the last 2 years, 2 years in a row, the largest capital investments and capital maintenance. And all of those were dollars that were going to be spent at some point in time. We're in a situation where we could spend on those things now, all of which were going to cost us more in the future if we kept deferring maintenance on those projects. And so that has certainly helped us tremendously in being able to keep from spending more dollars in those out years to renovate or to build a new building at that time. And I'll also say that we're investing, I believe, in a number of other programs and things through this budget that will help us prepare for the future. Things like education, things like workforce, the investments that we're making in TCATs, the investments we're making in allowing us to winnow down the waiting list for TCATs for people to get jobs, the investments that we're making in dental care. I mean, we're adding through this budget the ability for 900,000 people who do not have dental care today to be able to go to the dentist. Those are things that we believe will actually be able to save some dollars in the out years of being able to get better jobs and prepare people to better live their lives in Tennessee.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Commissioner. Because of inflation, and it's been talked about earlier, the cost of food now is tremendously high. And I think all of us are experiencing that. Mr. Chairman, this question is actually to you. If a member of this committee wanted to make a motion to forego the 1% reduction, being cautious on the $1.5 billion question or consideration, and put a motion to support a 1% reduction of the 4% on food, Could we do that? Could members put a motion on the table for that?
That's a great question. I am not the clerk, but I will tell you based upon we're currently out of session, so you can't do that when we're out of session. Today, we're not transacting business here because we don't have a bill before us. So if there was a bill before us, you could make an amendment. So you couldn't even do a verbal amendment on a bill if we had a bill before us. So in three different fashion, you would be out of order in order to do so. But it doesn't mean I don't like your passion for the subject matter at hand, but no, you would be out of order, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners, Deputy Governor, and your staff for being here today. We don't have any further questions, but we really appreciate it. As we talked before, part of the reason for this committee really is to have a discussion about what it would look like, what it would cost the state as it relates to revenue, and how that could not just impact the ratepayers, but also what the impact could be to the citizens if we did cut taxes. The last time we cut taxes was an F&E tax, which most citizens of the state didn't receive a benefit from. And yet, even though we cut those taxes, we still probably remained 50th in the state. The other two, as you mentioned, are closest to us, both have income tax in their state. So, and we do not. But as population continues to grow and people start moving to Rogersville and Signal Mountain, then we'll have all kinds of new ratepayers here. But we really appreciate your discussion today. I know that in the past we have done temporary tax cuts using sales tax holidays. It was a recognition that we were over collecting enough to where we could provide some revenue or sales tax relief to citizens. And so I think there's many different ways, whereas you and we together can find ways to return some monies in a short-term fashion rather than permanent fixes. But appreciate you guys coming today. And if there's no other questions, we're going to go back into session. Do the members have any comments? Move to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.